Hello again, everybody. Today we are going to practice working with a special set of words in English that can behave in a very special way. However, these words are absolutely necessary for you to develop your English fluency. Have you guessed what they are yet? Well, they're modal verbs, but we've been using modal verbs for a while, and I'm sure that you've seen them for a while. So what makes modal verbs so special? Well, the usage of modal verbs gives us the chance to express our attitude about other actions that we're discussing. Now, the following are the modal verbs in English: can, or its alternate form, could; shall, or should; may, or might; will, or would, as well as must, have to, need to, ought to, and dare to. Now, for a few of these, namely need to and ought to is optional. And there are some times when you need to use it, sometimes when you don't. But right now, just be aware that both forms can be used, and you will see both. Now, all modal verbs may, in practice, have two simultaneous meanings. For example, if we look at the modal verb can, it can express both the ability that I have to do something or the probability that I am going to do something. Just like in the sentence, he can walk there in 5 minutes. The first meaning, he can, I'm speaking about his ability. If he leaves now, he can walk here in 5 minutes. However, I could also express it as such. If he were to leave now, he could probably walk here in 5 minutes, or he can walk here in 5 minutes. Here, the sentence has both potential meanings, and I will understand which meaning that I should take by the context of the situation. So, continuing to speak about the grammatical forms of modal verbs, all modal verbs can be combined with all forms of the infinitive. Can, may, shall, must, will, have to, and need, with the indefinite infinitive, are used to show present actions or possible actions in the future. Just like our last example, he can walk here in 5 minutes. Or a few more examples, he can swim, or he can swim at the competition tomorrow, as well as you must be attentive, and he must be there in time. Now, could, might, or would with indefinite infinitives are used to refer to either actual actions in the past or doubtful actions in the present. For example, he could swim well in his youth. Here, I'm telling you that when he was young, he had the ability to swim very well. I don't know about now, though. Or, he could be there now. Now, this is a doubtful or a possible action, depending on the context. But all I'm letting you know is that it is possible that he is there now. Can, may, shall, must, will, have to, and need with the perfect infinitive, however, refer to a possible action in the past. For example, you may have seen this film yesterday. And one more, modal verbs combined with the perfect infinitive refer to a possibility in the past, or an unrealized past action depending on the form of the modal verb. For example, he could have been there, a possibility in the past, or he might have been there, an unrealized action. In this lecture, we're going to focus on the following sets of modal verbs: can and could, may and might, must, and have to. Now, let's begin by talking about can and its past tense form, could. Can has the following meanings. First, it can talk about ability, just like in the examples. Can you read German a little now? Or he could read German when he was 5 years old. Here, the modal verb can only takes the indefinite infinitive. And if we're referencing the past, we should use could when we're talking about any actions, skills, abilities, etc. Anything that is more of a habitual action. However, if you're talking about events that only happened once in the past, or maybe only a few times, we should not use could. Instead, we should use the phrases managed to do something, succeeded in doing something, or was or were able to do something. Just like in the examples, Bill could pass his exam in English because he knew it well. Here, this is incorrect because Bill only took the exam once. What we should say is Bill managed to pass his exam in English because he knew it well. Again, because he only took one exam, we use managed to and not could. Also, if we're expressing doubt and uncertainty, we also use the word could. Just like in the sentences, he could be a doctor, but he's too lazy. Here, I'm telling you that yes, it's possible, but I don't think he'll really do it because he's too lazy. Or, in another example, I could say that he could have been a good pianist in his youth, but he didn't practice enough. Here, I'm expressing doubt about something that happened in the past. And this is okay. We can use could to express doubt in the present or in the past. I can also use can and could to ask for permission. Now, using could in this case typically implies a little bit more politeness. Like in the examples, can I have another cup of tea? Or, could I visit you tomorrow? Here, in both of these, I'm asking for permission, and generally could is a little bit more polite. Finally, we can use could to express possibility. For example, could with the indefinite infinitive expresses something that could be true right now. For example, she could know the answer. I don't know if she knows it or not, but right now she could know. Now, could with the continuous infinitive expresses the possibility at the present moment, kind of like the last one, but in this case it's an action. Like in the sentence, he could be sleeping now. Here I'm expressing what he's doing right now, what action he is in the middle of. In the prior example, I was saying that she could know. It's more of a state, or more of a habitual or more permanent occurrence. And the final case of usage for could is that we can use could with the perfect infinitive to also express an action which was not realized in the past. Just like, he could have read that article, but he didn't. Here, there was the possibility in the past for him to read the article, but he chose not to. Now, that's it concerning the modal verbs can and could, but I would like to turn your attention to some set expressions which use these modal verbs. For example, the weather couldn't be worse, or the weather couldn't be better. It's an expression that we use when we want to talk about our happiness or unhappiness with the current state of the weather. Or another, I can't help but laughing. I cannot stop myself from laughing. Or, I can't help but do it. Here, again, I can't help but do it. I cannot stop myself from doing it. Or the phrase, I couldn't care less. Here, it is impossible for me to care less than I currently do. But this phrase isn't that serious. We use it a lot of times when we have no preference. Oh, where do you want to go for dinner? Honestly, I couldn't care less. I'm just hungry. And finally, a phrase like, I can't even. Like in the phrase, I can't even get up. Here, I'm talking about my complete lack of ability to do something. I can do so little right now, I cannot even stand. Now, that's all for can and could, and let's move on now to the modal verbs may and might, as well as compare them with our previously examined can and could. Might is the past form of may, which you may know. If you use may with reference to the present, it actually represents a more polite form of may and expresses the possibility. Like in the examples, he said it might rain, and he might still come. Here, I'm expressing a possibility, and functionally, this works very similarly to could. In fact, I could still say, he said it could rain. Now, may and its past form, might, have the following possible meanings. One, I can express uncertainty or supposition. Like in the example, I may come home late today, and he may be ill. Here, I've used may with the indefinite infinitive to express an action which may be possible in the present or future. May with the continuous infinitive expresses an action at the present moment. Like in the example, he may be sleeping now. And may with the perfect infinitive expresses an action which happened in the past but still has an effect now. Like in the example, he may have fallen asleep. We also use may and might to discuss hypothetical probabilities. For example, he may come and see us tomorrow. Now, we use might with the perfect infinitive in this case to express an action that wasn't realized. Like in the example, she might have fallen down, but a passerby gave her a hand. Here, I am saying that in the past it was possible, but it didn't happen. Now, we also use may and might to discuss permission. Like in the phrase, may I call you tomorrow? Now, remember though, if you are reporting speech, it's much better to use the expression, it's allowed to, or to be allowed to, instead of might, to avoid ambiguity, because might in reported speech can have a few different meanings. Let's look at a couple examples to see how this really works. I can say, for example, he said he might come to the party, but as a native speaker, I can tell you that I understand this as him saying that it is possible, not that he has permission. However, if he tells me he was allowed to come to the party, in this case, I know that he has permission from his parents, from his wife, from his roommate even. Now, just like can and could, there are also some set expressions with may and might that I would like to turn your attention to. First, may you be happy. Here, I'm just expressing my wish for you to be happy. Also, come what may. Now, here, I'm saying that no matter what happens, we will continue doing something or we will remain in this state. We are ready for whatever happens, come what may. And a third example, it might have been worse. Here, you may have also heard the example, it could have been worse. And here, again, you can switch could with might. And it might have been worse just means that in the past, there was the possibility for it to have been worse. But lucky for us, it wasn't. And let's sum up the usage of can and could versus may and might in Table 1. So, if we're talking about mental and physical ability, we should use can. In the present tense, he can read Spanish, and in the past, he could read Spanish when he was 7. However, in this case, for ability, we should not use may or might. If we're talking about possibility due to circumstances, we can use can and could in all types of sentences. For example, you can find the book in the library. Or, can you find this book for me? As well as, you cannot find this book in the library. However, for may and might, you should note that in the present tense, if you are using may, you should not use a negative sentence. In the affirmative sentence, you can say, you may find this book in the library, but do not say you may not find this book in the library. May not only refers to permission. You could, however, say, you might find this book in the library, or you might not find this book in the library. Only avoid may not. Talking about permission, if you're speaking in an informal style, then can and could are both okay. For example, can I speak to John, please? But if you're speaking in a formal style or in a formal scenario, you need to use may or might. Like, may I speak to Mr. Willis, please? And lastly, if we're referring to time, can and could can be used in almost all tenses, present, past, and future. For example, he could do it by himself in the past. He can do it by himself in the present and the future. However, may and might we only use with the present or the future. Might is used with reference to the past only in reported speech. For example, he may find this book at the library, or he said he might find this book at the library. And if we're using perfect tenses, may, or its past form, might, and could are equivalent. In the perfect tense, might and could are the same. Usually in the phrase, might and could have done. And this indicates that the action wasn't completed or realized in the past. The next pair of modal verbs that we need to talk about today are must and have to. And let's start with must. Must can be used with the following meanings. First, to express obligation from the speaker's point of view or by laws, rules, or regulations. Like in the example, you must work if you want to have means to live. Here, must, followed by the indefinite infinitive, expresses obligation in the present or future. Likewise, we can also use must to discuss official prohibition or a ban. For example, you mustn't smoke in public areas, and you mustn't cross the road on a red light. We can also use must to express supposition with strong possibilities, or to express things that we know to be true. Let's look at some examples using this. First, he must know the answer. Here, must followed by the indefinite infinitive expresses a supposition in the present. But if I say, look, the light is on, he must be home. Here, it's also expressing a supposition at present as well. If I say, she must be sunbathing now, here I've used must with the continuous infinitive. And this is a supposition at the present too, but it's about what she must be doing. It's about her action at this very second. And finally, you must have overslept again. Here, must followed by the perfect infinitive is used to express a supposition about the past. I am drawing conclusions about something that happened in the past. Now, to express supposition in the future, must is not used. Instead, you will use the adverbs probably or obviously. Like in the examples, I'll probably be late tomorrow, or obviously, I'll be late tomorrow. On the other hand, the modal verb have to is used in the present simple, past indefinite, and future indefinite tenses. And the negative and interrogative forms of sentences using these structures will need the help of an auxiliary, do, did, or will. Like in the examples, I have to get up at 6 o'clock in the present tense, so no auxiliary. Why do I have to do it? A question, so we need the auxiliary do. Why do I have to do it? Or we don't have to explain. Here, because I'm speaking negatively, we need the auxiliary don't. Now, have to can be used with the following meanings. First, we use it to express obligation or necessity due to the current circumstances. For example, I have no choice, I have to do it. Or 2, you have to pass the external evaluation test, otherwise universities won't accept you. Here, have got with the infinitive is used in the colloquial meaning. It's the same phrase, but it's very informal, and it's only used in the present indefinite. Now, negative and auxiliary sentences using have got to are formed without auxiliaries, and this is a very important point that I want to emphasize. If you are using have to in a negative statement or a question, you need an auxiliary verb. But if you say have or haven't got, you do not use an extra auxiliary. Now let's look at some examples using have got. First, have you got to do this work yourself? Or, I haven't got to wear a tie to work. Here, in both of these, a question and a negative statement, there is no auxiliary. Now, to compare must to have to, we need to note the difference. Must is based upon my point of view, or the point of view of law. It's what the speaker thinks should be true. However, have to is based on current circumstances. There are circumstances coming from other places, not the speaker, which make this action necessary or unnecessary. Now, that's about all for these two groups of modal verbs. To summarize, we've looked at the differences between can and could, and may and might, as well as the modal verbs must and have to. Now, be sure to review this lesson a few times, and particularly review the differences between can and may, because this is a very important part of the English language. And it's very, very important that you be able to distinguish when to use all of these cases. So review the materials, review the lesson, just like always. And I'm sure you'll have this down in no time. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at the rest of the modal verbs: should, ought to, will, need to, would, and that should give you something to look forward to, speaking of modal verbs. See you in the next lesson.